Well, despite the snow that's still left on a lot of our ground, it's time to plant corn in a lot of areas of the country. So there are a lot of considerations that go into that. What should you use for fungicide, for insecticide, for a biological product, and for fertility right in the furrow or right near that furrow when you're planting corn?
Many of these things that we're going to add on and talk about today will provide a good return on investment most years.
Okay, but where I want to start, let's talk about the negative real quick. We can potentially hurt yield with fertilizer in furrow, especially if it's got a lot of salt, especially if you have lighter soil or low CEC soil, and if it's a dry spring. We don't know if we're going to have a dry spring when we plant that corn. We really don't know. So maybe it will turn dry all of a sudden. Our whole point is with fertilizer, you've got to be really careful. You want to use low salt products. Try to keep it off the seed if possible. Also, we're going to talk a little about putting fungicide in furrow, like Headline, for example. We had a nice return on investment last year with that. But if you don't mix it right, then you could have sludge in the tank, and that's not a good thing. So anytime you're doing any of these things, fertilizer, insecticide, fungicide, biological, you always want to do a jar test.
All right. Is that enough of the negative now? Can we start going with the positive?
Yeah, that's pretty. Oh, the other negative is just, well, I don't know if this stuff is going to pay for me this year. And what we always encourage you to do is look at the long-term average. Look at the 5-year average. If you do one thing on one hybrid, 1 year in one soil under one weather condition, it might not work. But you know what? A lot of times, all these things that we're talking about here are going to work on the average. So you just want to look at the average all the time and try stuff yourself on your farm. If nothing else from today's conversation, we just want to get you excited about trying some things. That's how we've ended up doing all the things we do on a big scale on our farm, because we tried them in the first place on a small scale.
Okay, well, speaking about trying things, one new thing that I'll start our show off today with that we're going to try on our farm. It's a product called Challenge 2050. It's mycorrhizae fungi that actually help bring more phosphorus into your plant.
And other nutrients.
And we've seen some nice yield gains over the last couple of years in trials. We had a little bit out on our farm last year. It looked pretty good. So we're going to try a little bit more of it this year.
Okay, so a lot of times when people hear about these biological products, they say, oh, I don't know if that stuff's actually going to work. But what I want to point you to, do a little research on the internet yourself. Look at how all the big companies, Monsanto, BASF, Bayer, every one of them, they've been buying biological companies lately. They're not going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars if there isn't actually some science and something good behind that. Now, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, all biological products work, but I'm just encouraging you, try some of these things out.
Well, what I like is I farm with one of the most skeptical guys I've ever been around. It's Brian. You know, nothing new. Oh, man, I don't know. They're making big claims. I don't know if that could possibly work. And so you look at something like Headline, and they talk about plant health benefits. Well, I say, cool, that's neat. If we can keep this plant healthier and I see a little greener plant later in the year and all this, Brian's like, oh, I don't know about this plant health. You know, how did that plant health work out for the corn last year, Brian?
So my whole thing is, I'm not saying it doesn't necessarily work. I'm just saying, I don't know if I believe all this plant health, all these extra things happening.
He wants to see it on our own farm, and then he'll believe it.
That, but what I've always believed is that maybe there's just a low level of disease. Like right now, if you look at me, I may look perfectly healthy, but I might think, well, I got a little bit of a cold coming on, and if I was to take some medicine or whatever, I'd be 100% healthy instead of 99% healthy. Maybe that's where the yield gain is coming from. But you know, at the end of the day, I couldn't care less where the yield gain comes from as long as we have the yield gain. And like last year on our farm, we did do Headline in furrow, and we gained like 6.5 bushels. We had a whole bunch of replications, and that's what we got. So we're going to try it on a bunch more acres this year. Hopefully we get that same kind of return, maybe better.
Okay, now you're probably saying, wait a minute now, you already talked about putting a biological in furrow. Now you're talking about putting this fungicide in furrow. I'm probably going to put some insecticide in furrow. And also, we haven't even started talking about fertilizer. You know, fertilizer is important too.
You can do fertilizer any way you want. We just want to get it up into the plant, and in furrow or banding of some sort is a very efficient way to do it. You just have to be careful and not put too much in furrow, especially of high salt products like 1034 or 721.
I think you had a great point there on the salt, and that's why we've switched over a lot of that liquid now. We've gotten away from some of those sources, and we're using very, very low salt content fertilizer, and we've seen a difference in our crop. We don't have to worry as much when you get in a dry year like last year. So we're using products like Pro Germinator and Sure-K right in the furrow, and that works fine. The question just gets to be, all right, if you're doing that and the insecticide and the fungicide and the biological, can you mix all that together at the same time? That's a good question.
Well, you're going to have a bunch of water with it, at least 50% water with all this other stuff, but make sure you're doing jar tests and just try some things out. So once again, yes, Yeah, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff on our farm right with the planter. Insecticide, fungicide, biological product, and fertility, obviously. So it may seem like a lot, it may slow you down just a little bit, but we want to encourage you, focus on return on investment and try to figure these things out so it doesn't take you a lot of extra time, yet you can really increase yield and increase your bottom line.
Well, unfortunately, all that stuff we talked about doesn't do anything for our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?